For the nation's debt, the stock market, and the coming debate over the Dreamers with White House Budget Director Mick Mulvaney, who's being talked about as a possible replacement for Chief of Staff. Then, the deficit hawks in Congress feel betrayed by a Republican president and congressional leaders.
A country cannot go on forever spending money this way.
Past decade, this is probably the second largest discretionary spending increase, second only to Obama's stimulus package. So you know how obnoxious that was.
We'll ask Ohio Congressman Jim Jordan whether his hard-line House Freedom Caucus is out of business.
Well, we wish him well.
Plus, backlash to President Trump's defense of a senior staffer accused of abuse by two ex-wives.
As you probably know, he says he's innocent.
There's no question they could have handled it better.
We'll ask our Sunday panel if White House mishandling of the Rob Porter affair will cost other officials their jobs. And our Power Player of the Week, the keeper of a trove of Nazi art glorifying Adolf Hitler, few people will ever get to see.
Do you ever feel like you're in that huge warehouse at the end of Indiana Jones?
All right now on Fox News Sunday. And hello again from Fox News in Washington. This was always going to be a big week for White House Budget Director Mick Mulvaney with the release of the president's spending plan for next year. But that has been overtaken by events. First, Congress passed and Mr. Trump signed a 2-year spending plan that adds hundreds of billions of dollars to the deficit. And now the White House is dealing with its mishandling of domestic abuse allegations against former Staff Secretary Rob Porter. And there's talk the president may be looking to replace Chief of Staff General John Kelly. Among the names being floated, Budget Director Mick Mulvaney. And welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Morning. Thanks very much for having me back.
Yes, and I'm sure you're delighted by that introduction.
You forgot about the shutdown last weekend, too. So
yes, that's true. Well. Has the president or anyone around him talked to you about replacing General Kelly as White House Chief of Staff?
Absolutely not. And I think all the stories about replacing General Kelly are mostly being fed by people who are unhappy that they've lost access to the president under General Kelly's leadership as Chief of Staff. So, no, I'm extraordinarily pleased with the job the chief has been doing. Everybody in the West Wing is. The president is as well. I think that talk about the chief's departure is much ado about nothing.
Have you talked with General Kelly about his status, his standing?
Absolutely not. And again, that's because I don't think it's an issue. Keep in mind, working in the West Wing and reading about it in the newspaper, watching on television, could not be more different. The place is very stable, very quiet. So all the media hype about all the disarray is just that.
But when you suggest that these stories are being fed by people who've lost access because General Kelly has imposed order, you seem to be suggesting it's being fed by people inside the West Wing.
No, keep in mind, before the general got there, just about anybody could get access to the West Wing. So there's a bunch of people who are not inside the White House who are also upset that he's controlled it in a way that has made us much more productive. Keep in mind, since the chief has come on, we've managed to pass the tax bill, the economy is going again, ISIS is defeated. There's a lot of good things that have been happening since the chief is there, and I think the president sees that. The results speak for themselves.
Let's talk about the bigger underlying issue there, and then I promise we'll move on to your day job. You ran a congressional office. You now run a major governmental agency. What is your policy on dealing with allegations of domestic abuse against your staff?
That we don't tolerate it at all. Keep in mind, it's never come up. It's never come up. Maybe I'm just fortunate with the people that I surround myself with, the fortunate the people that I hire. It's never come up to me in business. It's never come up to me in my congressional staff, and it's never come up to me as my position as the director of the Office of Management and Budget.
You don't tolerate it at all. What does that mean?
You simply don't. You don't tolerate it. You cannot have domestic. You cannot put trust in people who would do that to their spouse of either gender. So we have a zero tolerance policy for it.
I want to ask you about that zero tolerance because President Trump has been criticized for his response to the Rob Porter scandal. Here's what he said on Friday. Take a look.
We certainly wish him well. It's a obviously tough time for him. He did a very good job when he was in the White House. And we hope he has a wonderful career, and hopefully he will have a great career ahead of him.
And the president tweeted this yesterday. People's lives are being shattered and destroyed by a mere allegation. Is there no such thing any longer as due process? There was no mention of zero tolerance. In fact, at no point, either Friday or Saturday, did the president even mention the two ex-wives who claimed that they were victims of abuse.
Go back and watch what happened this week, and I think it's a very normal reaction to the circumstance. Someone who we know and trust and worked with, Rob Porter, came to the President of the United States and the Chief of Staff and said, look, I'm being accused of these things. They are not true. For the President or for the Chief of Staff to give that person the benefit of the doubt is probably a very normal and human reaction. If your cameraman came to you and said, look, I'm going to be accused of something, but it's not true, you'd be likely to try to want to give that person benefit of the doubt until they were proven wrong. As soon as Rob Porter was proven wrong and he was proven that he was not telling us the truth when the photos came out on Wednesday, he was gone almost immediately. So I know...
And I really don't want to keep on this, but
right.
Even after he was gone, the president still has not said anything about zero tolerance. He still hasn't mentioned the lives of the two women who were the subjects of abuse, that those lives have been shattered too.
What I think you saw there was a couple of different things. I think the tweet could be applied to a bunch of different people. In fact, when I saw the tweet, I noticed Rob Porter wasn't mentioned. I wondered if the president was talking about his friend Steve Wynn, who has been accused and essentially condemned without any due process. But what you also saw there from the president is a certain sadness that somebody that he liked had let him down.
All right, let's go to your day job. Let's talk money. On Friday, the president signed a bipartisan plan passed by Congress that will add $400 billion in new spending, deficit spending, to the budget over the next 2 years. Here's how our next guest, your former colleague in the House Freedom Caucus, Jim Jordan, reacted.
This is probably the second largest discretionary spending increase, second only to Obama's stimulus package. So you know how obnoxious that was. So this is not what we were elected to do.
Is Congressman Jordan wrong?
No, he's not. He's just not recognizing the realities that we deal with. The reality is that the president wanted to defend the nation. The president's first priority, he said this during the campaign, he said this since he was elected, he said it the other night at the State of the Union, was to defend the nation. We really thought we could cut a deal with the Democrats that would increase defense spending in order to defend the nation. They said that publicly they wanted to work with us on that, but when the doors closed, what happened was they would not give us a single dollar worth of additional defense spending without giving us additional money for welfare spending. And that's just the world we live in. People think that we can do what we want to in Washington because Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the White House. But the truth of the matter is, because of the 60-vote rule in the Senate, we need Democrat support. And Democrats would not support our increase in defense spending without that dramatic increase in social welfare programs.
During your confirmation hearing for this job back in January of 2017, you criticized the Obama presidency for overspending. Here you are.
I believe as a matter of principle that the debt is a problem that must be addressed sooner rather than later. I also know that fundamental changes are necessary in the way Washington spends and taxes if we truly want a healthy economy.
But under this new plan, with the new spending, the deficit will rise from $439 billion in 2015 under Obama to a projected $1.2 trillion in 2019 and trillion-dollar deficits for the years after that. There's always a reason. In other words, you're saying, well, it's the Democrats' fault. Obama might have said it was the Republicans' fault in the recession. Bottom line, isn't President Trump the big spender now?
Well, go to your premise. Your premise is that we're going to have larger deficits this year, which is absolutely true. But then you also say we're going to have larger deficits forever and ever and ever.
Well, 2019, next year,
right.
$1.2 trillion is the projection.
And that's correct. And I think that's probably close to being accurate. Again, we haven't had a chance to completely integrate the numbers from the bill that passed a couple days ago to what we were working on last week. But the truth of the matter is that when we roll out the budget on Monday, which is tomorrow now, you're going to get a chance to see how we can avoid that future. The budget does bend the trajectory down. It does move us back towards balance. It does get us away from trillion-dollar deficits. Just because this deal was signed does not mean the future is written in stone. We do have a chance still to change this trajectory, and that's what the budget will show tomorrow.
Well, you know, I sympathize with you because you were writing a federal budget. That's a complicated thing. It was going to be released tomorrow, and now on Friday the president signs a bill which adds $400 billion in spending over 2 years. Will this new budget that you release tomorrow reflect what Congress has just passed and the president has just signed.
This may be the most complicated budget anyone's ever going to do. Tomorrow what we're going to be doing, Chris, is we're going to be doing an update to our 2018 budget, which we released back in the spring, in order to bring it in line with the spending deal that was passed last week. Then we're also going to be updating our 2019 budget. Keep in mind, we started doing that last September to also bring it in line. And the argument...
So this will reflect the 400.
Both of the 2018 and 2019 budgets. It's been a very busy week at OMB. And what we're doing is this, is saying, look, you don't have to spend all of this money. These are spending caps. They are not spending floors. You don't have to spend all that. So we're going to show how you could run the government without spending all of that.
But you know.
And that will be our 2019 budget. But if you are going to spend it, which is exactly what we think Congress is going to do, here's how you should spend it. And that will be our 2018 budget. So take the money that the Democrats want to put to these social programs and move it to things like infrastructure, move it to things like opioid relief, move it to things that are in line with the president's priorities, so that if it does get spent, at least it gets spent in the right places.
In your first budget, the one for 2018, for this year, that you introduced last year, yes, it's complicated, you called for major spending cuts on the domestic side. Let's put them up on the screen. 28% less for the State Department and foreign aid, 31% cut for the EPA, 18% less for the National Institutes of Health. But under the congressional compromise, all of those agencies get more money, not less money. So in a sense, haven't the Trump-Mulvaney spending priorities for this year and last, haven't they been rejected by Congress?
No, and keep in mind, I don't want to get too far deep in the weeds, but the bill that passed last week is not a spending bill. It's not an appropriations bill. It will simply set the caps, spending limits.
There was some detail in it as to what the spending will be.
There is, but you're still going to see some reductions in our proposals to the State Department. You're still going to see some reductions in our proposals to the EPA. There's still going to be the president's priorities as we seek to spend the money consistently with our priorities, not with the priorities that were reflected mostly by the Democrats in Congress.
Now, in this new budget that you're going to be putting out tomorrow, will you allocate some of the money that was going to go to DHS as a down payment on President Trump's border wall?
Yeah, in fact, a couple different things. Last year in the 2018 budget, we asked for some money for the wall. I think it was about $1.6 billion. We're asking for about $3 billion, I think, this year for the wall. But we're also putting in a contingency in this 2018, what we call this pivot, as we try and pivot off of the old budget onto the new to reflect the spending priorities or the spending bill that just passed, is enough money to build the whole wall, or actually most of it, assuming that DACA gets done. So what I'm saying in a very confusing way is that we are assuming in our 2018 proposal that a DACA deal is done and that the border wall is funded.
So, and is that $20 billion? I
think it's 25, and I think we do half of that this year and half of that next year.
The stock markets, I don't have to tell you, have been going crazy over the last 10 days. We've seen the two biggest point drops, not percentage drops, but point drops in history. Over 1,000 points 2 days, and we're now in correction territory, down 10% from the high a couple of weeks ago. One of the big concerns is that the economy is in danger of overheating, that we're going to have inflation, that we're going to have higher interest rates, that's going to tamp down growth. Under this new spending plan that Congress has passed and the president has signed, we're talking about deficits next year, 5% of GDP, which is usually only happens during war or recession. Isn't it dangerous to have a 5% GDP deficit as a percentage of GDP when you're talking about an economy that's going at great guns?
Certainly there's a risk that interest rates will spike, and there's a concern. I think what you saw last week when you started these wild gyrations in the stock market. Keep in mind, though, Chris, that 1,000-point drop I think we had on Monday of last week was only the 99th largest reduction on a percentage basis. So even though that 1,000 points sounds like it's fairly dramatic in the history of things, it's not that large of a swing. But I think what triggered that was not the fact that we were overheating the economy, but that we were borrowing too much money. The Treasury had reached out to some of the primary dealers last week.
But now you're going to have to borrow more money.
To anticipate the additional debt. I think the one thing we keep coming back to, though, is we've fundamentally changed the structure of the economy. This is not a fiscal stimulus. It's not a sugar high. It's not the same thing as what President Obama did. I'm talking now about the tax bill. We have fundamentally changed the structure of the American economy to where we think we can change the long-term trends of our growth possibilities, the long-term trends of the economy, and that we'll have that sustained growth that could maintain.
But I just have to pick up that because you're also adding $400 billion in new spending and $1 trillion deficit next year, which only increases government borrowing. You say that could make interest rates spike.
It absolutely could. Keep in mind, though, that we're also looking now at a healthier economy than we expected. When we rolled out the budget last year, we were accused of being way too overly optimistic on our growth rates for this year and for next, and we're already below what we're actually achieving. You saw the Atlanta Fed come out last week and I think predict growth over 5% in this quarter. So if we can keep the economy humming and generate more money for you and me and for everybody else, the government takes in more money, and that's how we hope to be able to keep the debt under control.
Director Mulvaney, thank you. Thanks for coming in today. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, sir.
Thank you.
Up next, one of the founders of the House Freedom Caucus, Congressman Jim Jordan. Is the era of spending restraint now over? Ever since the rise of the Tea Party in 2010, congressional Republicans have talked about shrinking the size of the federal government. But all that seemed forgotten this week with passage of a budget deal with $400 billion of new spending. Joining us now, Congressman Jim Jordan, a founder of the House Freedom Caucus and still a deficit hawk, which has become something of an endangered species on Capitol Hill. Congressman, welcome back.
Good to be with you.
Some people are suggesting that this bipartisan spending deal means that the era of spending restraint and the Tea Party is over when you have big majorities of Republicans in both the House and the Senate approving this kind of a bill and a Republican president signing it. Are those folks right?
Well, here's what I know, Chris. This was not consistent with what the American people elected us to do, not consistent with what we told them we were going to do. And in your first segment with Mick, look, he said we don't have 60 votes in the Senate to get some things done. And I'm all for changing the Senate rule. But last time I checked, Democrats don't have 60 votes in the Senate either. And last time I checked, there's more Republicans in the Senate than there are Democrats, more Republicans in the House than there are Democrats, and there's a Republican in the White House. So this deal, which increased spending $300 billion, second largest spending increase in a decade, second only to the stimulus, was not what we said we would do. And we're going to have to fight harder now as a Freedom Caucus and conservatives to get things back on track.
When you say that there are more Republicans than Democrats and a Republican in the White House, are you saying, in effect, the Democrats won and the Republicans caved?
No, I'm saying the swamp won and the American taxpayer lost. And here's the frustrating thing. We were so poised to win. 3 weeks ago, we sent a bill to the Senate. Chuck Schumer shut down the government, didn't pay our troops because he said amnesty was more important. Earlier last week, the House sent the same bill, the exact same bill to the Senate, except we did one thing different. We funded the military for the entire year. And instead of standing firm in that position, our leadership said, no, no, no. Let's do what Washington always does. Let's just spend more on everything. Let's just grow government, give in to the Democrats instead of fight and stand firm and do what the people elect us to do. They gave in to the Democrats, and we got this boondoggle that we passed. I didn't vote for it, but that passed on Friday morning.
Well, you talk tough, but some folks are now saying that this deal puts the House Freedom Caucus that you and Mick Mulvaney helped start, puts you guys out of business. And let me put up the reasons that they suggest. You lose the debt ceiling for the next 2 years as a weapon to demand policy changes. With this 2-year agreement, you can no longer use the threat of a government shutdown. And with no budget resolution this year, you won't be able to use reconciliation to get a major initiative through the Senate with just 51 votes. Honestly, Congressman, with this agreement, haven't you and deficit hawks like you in the House Freedom Caucus lost your leverage to shrink government spending?
Well, I think who lost in this deal was the American taxpayer.
No. But I understand that talking point, but I'm saying hasn't this made the House Freedom Caucus a lot less effective in your ability to force change?
First of all, it's not a talking point, it's the truth. Second, people have been trying to write off the Freedom Caucus since the last election. I remember right after the last election said, oh, the Freedom Caucus is gone now because Republicans. Well, I think we've been the most effective caucus and certainly the most talked about caucus on Capitol Hill the last year and a half. And I would argue our chairman, frankly, is probably the member closest to the president, closer than probably any other member in the House or the Senate. So they can always say they're going to write us off. But what I know is we got a big debate coming. the debate on immigration, and the Freedom Caucus is going to be in the middle of that, and the Speaker of the House promised the Freedom Caucus, promised conservatives in the House that he would put the good legislation, the legislation that is consistent with the mandate of the 2016 election, that he would whip that, bring that to the floor, and
that
we
is the
would
much
pass
more
that.
hard-line immigration package.
It's the package that's consistent with the election. It says build the border security wall, end chain migration, stop sanctuary city policy, do all the same those things that the American people want us to do, and then also deal with the DACA situation. So it prioritizes things in the right manner, and it focuses on what the people elected us to do. Let's pass that legislation, and that's the big fight coming. That's what we're going to be weighing in and trying to accomplish.
All right. Before we get to immigration, and we will, I want to ask you a little bit more about this spending package, because House Speaker Paul Ryan defends the compromise that he helped get through. Here he is.
This is a bipartisan bill. Just like Leader Schumer said, you get some things you like, you give the other side things they like. That's what bipartisan compromise is all about. And I think on the net, this is a very good solution.
On net, a very good solution. Do you still have full confidence in House Speaker Paul Ryan, or is it time for him to leave?
Well, here's what I know. Spending bills start in the House of Representatives. The person most responsible for this spending bill is the Speaker of the House. He could have stood firm for the position that we passed earlier in the week, the position that our conference then supported. I wish he would have done that. So do I think the Speaker has problems? Yes, I do, particularly now as we head into this big immigration debate. Just a few years ago, he was viewed as the leader of fiscal responsibility in our party, and now he presides over a bill that increases spending $300 billion, a $1 trillion deficit. When we were so poised to win this fight, of course he's got problems. But the key is, let's see what happens next on this immigration issue.
You say he's got problems, Congressman. Is it time for a change?
Well, you know, look, we'll have that debate at the appropriate time. You asked me if there's concerns with the Speaker. I think there are big concerns because he just presided over one of the biggest spending increases in the history of this country at a time when we were elected to do just the opposite.
Let's turn to immigration. The Senate takes up DACA this week, trying to find some solution, some compromise. And what they're talking about, and also what the president's talking about, is a package that includes, now you put the tough part first, the president and some Republicans say that it all comes together, that you're going to have a path to citizenship for the Dreamers in 10 to 12 years. You're going to have tougher border enforcement on our southern border, and also tougher enforcement of both legal and illegal immigration. Would you support that package?
I'll support a package consistent with what the voters said. I mean, look, the voters don't trust that Washington's going to do the right thing on immigration, and they're tired of this. Oh, we'll give some kind of amnesty to folks who came here illegally, and we promise we'll do something to secure the border. They're sick of that play. What they want is border security first. So build the border security wall, end the chain migration, get rid of this crazy visa lottery, do things in a way that make good comments, sanctuary city policy, get rid of those. Do those things first. Then we'll deal with the DACA situation. That is consistent with the mandate of the 2016 election, and frankly consistent with what the president and what Republicans campaigned on.
But I'm asking
and that is consistent with Goodlatte's legislation. That's why we want to pass that.
I'm asking you a direct question, because that isn't where this compromise seems headed in the Senate. They're talking about doing them all at once, the path to citizenship and these other things all at the same time, not enforcement first. Can you accept all of those as a package?
Of course not. The Freedom Caucus won't support that, and I don't think a majority of the House of Representatives will support that. And Speaker Ryan knows that he can't put a bill on the floor unless a majority of the House Republicans are supportive of that measure.
So you're saying that if all of these things come together as a package, DACA, deal for the Dreamers, and the tougher enforcement, that's unacceptable to you, and you believe a majority of Republicans?
You asked me about the Senate bill. What's being proposed in the Senate is not going to be acceptable to conservatives in the House, guaranteed, because it's not going to be acceptable to the American people. If they do legislation like what is Chairman Goodlatte's legislation that has been worked on by him, Congressman Labrador, Congressman McCall, if they put that kind of legislation on the floor, you will see conservatives support that because, again, Chris, it's consistent with what the American people elected us to do in 2016.
Let me ask you about that, because you've made that point several times, what the American people elected you to do, and with the Republican majority in 2016. do you think that the passage of the spending bill, and depending on what happens on immigration, could this hurt Republicans in the 2018 midterms? In other words, the folks that felt, well, the conservative voters, if we elect a Republican House, a Republican Senate, and a Republican president, we're going to get conservative policies. Do you think some of them may just stay home if they see Congress and the...
Yes. Heck yes. I mean, come on. When you get elected to do the right thing on immigration and you got a bill that they're talking about in the Senate maybe passing, that's going to hurt, I think, turnout, and going to, people aren't going to be pleased with that. And then when you increase spending, $300 billion, just grow government, run $1 trillion deficit, heck yes, that could hurt us. That's why we're so focused on making sure this immigration bill gets done right. That's why we fought the spending bill as hard as we did last week.
I got one more question for you, and I got less than a minute. Friday evening, the president sent the Democratic memo on FISA and the FBI back to the House saying that there's too much sensitive intelligence in it.
Yeah.
Democrats have to rewrite it. How do you answer folks who say, well, the president just ignored the criticisms from the FBI when it came to the Republican memo, but now he's using their objections to delay the Democratic memo?
President was in a no-win situation. The way Schiff constructed the memo, if he redacts it or doesn't release it, he's not for transparency. If he releases it, he actually jeopardizes sources, methods, and potentially lives of Americans and others who help in our intelligence community. He was in a tough situation. But that wasn't the big news this week. The big news this week was the text message from Lisa Page to Peter Strzok, where she said, POTUS, referring to President Obama, POTUS wants to know everything we're doing. And the significance of that, Chris, was when it came. July 5th, they let Clinton off. No charges brought against Clinton. Into July, Peter Strzok opens the Russian investigation. Peter Strzok, the same agent who ran the Clinton investigation. And then September 2nd, you have this text message which says, POTUS wants to know everything we're doing. Peter Strzok, the guy ran the Clinton investigation, ran the Russian investigation. That's the real takeaway this week on the whole Russian matter.
All right, we're going to have to dig down into that. We'll have you back. It's always interesting to talk to you, Congressman Jordan. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Please come back, sir.
I will. Take care.
Up next, we'll bring in our Sunday group to discuss the Democratic FBI memo the president refused to release. Plus, what would you like to ask the panel about how the White House handled the Rob Porter domestic abuse scandal? Just go to Facebook or Twitter at Fox News Sunday, and we may use your question on the air.
The general is there to put in policies and processes and procedures. Those didn't work, and we need to find out why.
I believe that this president has confidence in John Kelly. I will say that the process here failed. I don't know where the buck stops on the process.
Former top Trump campaign advisors Corey Lewandowski and David Bossie, who still have the president's ear, wasting no time pinning the blame for the Rob Porter scandal on White House Chief of Staff John Kelly. And it's time now for our Sunday group, former Republican Congressman Jason Chaffetz, Fox News analyst Marie Harf, Rachel Bade, who covers Congress for Politico, and Guy Benson of townhall.com. Well, Congressman, as someone who's seen how Washington works, how do you explain the way the White House has handled or mishandled the Rob Porter scandal? And do you think that General Kelly's job is in real jeopardy, or do you think these leaks that the president is mentioning other names is just a way of him showing Kelly who's boss?
I think they still have a lot of confidence in General Kelly. I do think Mick Mulvaney, if it came to that, would be a great chief of staff. But nonetheless, even the White House spokesperson said earlier this week that they had mishandled this. I do think the White House should have an accounting. Let's understand who has a security clearance and who doesn't. And if you have to take a timeout and go take another job, but in the inner sanctum, the closest people to the president cannot be operating with proximity to top secret classified information without a security clearance. I think it's pretty black and white.
We ask you for questions for the panel, and we got this on Twitter from Brett Shuchat, who writes, given the last year with high-profile harassment and assault, why wouldn't Chief of Staff Kelly and White House counsel Don McGahn have put Porter on paid leave until accusations fully investigated? Was the White House deaf and blind to high-profile assault stories? Marie, how do you answer Brett?
Well, I think that the White House was a little blind here, and this isn't the first time they've dealt with this. Steve Bannon worked at the White House. He had been accused in the past of assaulting his wife as well. So this is a process story in part, but it's also a principle story. They have known for months about these allegations. Both ex-wives went to the FBI, gave them accounts. It was only when it became a public relations problem and the photos came out that the White House actually acted. So I would say say in this country right now, we are going through a moment where sexual harassment and sexual assault are really being a topic of discussion. They're being handled in a much more serious way. And the White House really feels like it's behind the 8 ball here in how they handled this. And I think John Kelly has some answering to do for it.
Guy, let me pick up on that with you, because we've got the president here who on Friday, after Porter's gone, after they've dealt with the, quote, public relations problem, is saying, well, I feel sad for Porter and he's going to have a great career. And then the tweet on Saturday in which he says, you know, we need due process here and people's lives are being destroyed by allegations. No mention of the 2 ex-wives.
Yeah, well, the statement from the president was one of regret on behalf of Porter. Oh, it's been a tough time for him. We wish him the very best in his career. Nary a word about the alleged victims, of which there are 3. And I'm sympathetic to this argument that just because an allegation exists that someone should lose their job and have their life shattered. But in this case, you have to use reason and evidence. And we know this is 3 women. There's a photo of a blackened eye. There's a police report. There's a restraining order. And the FBI was not giving this man a security clearance for a reason. There's a pile of evidence. And to sort of elide